you. Thank you. Good afternoon. I am delighted to be here. Thanks to Innova for inviting me and all of you for being here. So this session brings us together to explore the sharing economy, what it is, what it means for individuals and business, how it relates to sustainability and green investing, and what's on the horizon. We're going to look at what's happening globally in the sharing economy and how Norway fits in. We're going to look at how the sharing economy and circular economy are in some ways similar and in other ways very different. And I'm going to do this without once mentioning, except for right now, Uber or Airbnb. We're going to talk about other things and bring in some new concepts. So my goal today is to provide a solid foundation for you to understand the sharing economy, to connect the dots between the sharing economy and environmental priorities, and to inspire you to learn more. So we have a lot to cover. Let's get started. First, let's spend a couple of minutes doing a quick history behind the sharing economy so we can better understand how we got to today. Now, when I say the term sharing economy, for some of you that might sound new, for others, not so much. And in one way, there is absolutely nothing new about sharing. Up until the Industrial Revolution, it's how we stayed alive. We shared all kinds of things, from market space to farm equipment. We built shared infrastructure, like roads and waterways. We shared our skills and labor to harvest crops and make things. Now, many of these early systems of sharing were based on trust and reciprocity. They tended to be highly local and didn't require much technology. Then, the Industrial Revolution showed up, and it brought us an abundance of goods, but in the process also broke some of these earlier systems of reciprocity. Money and markets largely replaced sharing, leaving us hungry for a sense of community and connectedness. Globally, this industrial system peaked in roughly the 1980s with the perfection of consumer mass marketing and the take, make, waste economy we heard about this morning. The winners in this economy were those who could tuck themselves away, stuck in traffic jams, living in secluded neighborhoods, and surrounded by prepackaged goods, and ignore society. But as we've learned, stuff doesn't buy happiness. Then, just before the new millennium, the internet shows up, and it breaks these old models yet again, fundamentally redefining how and with whom we can connect. Each of these earlier innovations, the Industrial Revolution, consumer mass marketing, and the internet, was highly disruptive, changing what people could do, how they saw one another, and what they strove for. We can think of today's sharing economy as building on some of these earlier innovations while repairing some of the damage done. It's kind of like a process of rediscovery. Now, against this backdrop, pause and think about what you can do today with access to the internet and the phone in your hand. You can find pretty much everything. All kinds of information, your next job, your next holiday, even your next date. Now, imagine, it is expected that by 2020, that's only 3 years from now, 90% of the global population over age 6 will have a mobile phone, and the vast majority of people alive will not know or remember a world in which they couldn't find everything through their phone. So the power and opportunity that this kind of connectivity unleashes is unprecedented. It will transform not only how we build and do business and how we think about the environment, but also how we live our lives, how we raise our families, and the kind of future that we build. One of the more interesting results of this newfound connectivity is the rise of today's sharing economy, an economy based on access over ownership and decentralized networks of people connected through new technologies. At its core, the sharing economy is driven by 3 key principles. The first principle is resource utilization. The sharing economy allows us to use the things we have better, both by monetizing underutilized assets and foregoing purchases altogether. How many of you have a car that is parked right now in the garage or in a parking lot? Don't be shy. It's okay. There we go. Okay. Many of you have probably heard this before, but a car sits parked and unused, on average, 23 hours a day. 95% of the time, it is completely inefficient. How many of you have clothes that you purchased at some point and now they're kind of forgotten in some closet somewhere? Right? Okay. The average person owns 3 times as many clothes as they think they do. How many of you have children for whom you've purchased toys or clothes and they've quickly outgrown and are stashed away again? You get my point. Exactly. This is underutilization. And once you start looking for it, you find it everywhere. So hold this thought. We're going to come back to it often. The second principle is decentralization. Now, prior to the sharing economy, companies typically held centralized inventory that they then sold or rented out to everybody else. But the system was centralized. Today, however, thanks to new technologies and particularly peer-to-peer platforms, we're looking at a new universe of decentralized assets, things owned by people like you and me, which we can now put into better use directly with one another. In effect, matching supply and demand, or needs and haves, more efficiently. And the final principle is relationships. Mass consumption, mass consumerization, has had some perverse and damaging effects. As everyone owned more stuff, and I had all of my things and you had all of your things, what we found is we often don't need to know our neighbors. Isolation and loss of community, these are big social problems. And it's not that the sharing economy solves them, but it does get at the heart of what's gone wrong. It brings people back into relationship with one another. The vast majority of sharing requires some kind of human interaction. Now, when we look at the sharing economy today, we see that it does touch almost every aspect of our lives. It goes far beyond what and how we purchase, but it also touches how we work, how we travel, how we learn, how we eat, how we spend and invest our money, how we provide for our families and connect in our communities. Now, this slide is just a small snapshot of the sharing economy universe. There are platforms and companies to share all of these assets and many more. We don't have time to go into all of these details today, or all of these examples, but I want to underscore the breadth, depth, scope, and diversity of what's going on. I'd also like you to keep in mind 2 things. First, all of the platforms to share all of these different kinds of assets are driven by the same 3 principles. So in other words, it's all connected. And secondly, while I appreciate that we're here today to talk about what the sharing economy means for business, don't just think about what this means for you professionally. Think about what this means for you personally as well. So professionally, of course, you want to be thinking about what does the sharing economy mean for what kinds of products and services and investments I should make? And also, of course, internally, what does the sharing economy mean for my operations, my team, and my overhead? But in addition to your professional role, think about what this could mean for you personally, in your role as a parent, a neighbor, a member of your community. How might it affect your lifestyle, your family's budget, and of course, your carbon footprint? Now, just a quick word on terminology, and then we're going to dive into a bunch of examples. As the sharing economy has grown, some people have challenged that it's not really sharing. And they're partly right. The sharing economy is a very broad umbrella term. And on the one hand, it does include a lot of companies and platforms that espouse the true spirit of sharing and underutilized assets. On the other hand, it does include some, what I call share washing, companies latching on to this term because it sounds good. Now, a growing list of terms is emerging that attempts to define this space, including those here on this slide. Now, each of these terms is partially valid, many of them overlap, and none of them is perfect. But what I want to underscore is simply that regardless of what we call these new business models, they're taking root and growing fast. And whether and how we adapt to them will fundamentally determine our success and our well-being moving forward. With that, let's look at a bunch of examples, particularly those that are relevant for Innova and the future of the sharing economy. Now, let's start with transportation, not only because it has massive climate implications, but also because it's where some of the most interesting activity is happening today. Think about how inefficient transport today is. Not only does your car sit parked there 23 hours a day, it costs, on average, €700 a month to maintain, and 80% of all rides taken have one person in the vehicle. This kind of waste is ridiculous. Now, at the same time, there are other trends that are emerging that we need to be paying attention to as well. For example, the percentage of millennials applying for new driver's licenses in developed markets is at an all-time low since the car was invented. Surveys show that 75% of 18 to 24-year-olds would rather own a smartphone than a car. And governments worldwide are investing in transport solutions that see cars as the last resort. Now, people everywhere are going to continue to need cars in some way. But who owns them, how we access them, and what a person's overall transport picture looks like will be very different. Already today, there is a wide range of shared-use transportation options available. This goes far beyond Zipcar, which was one of the earliest car-sharing pioneers. Today, we see peer-to-peer car sharing with platforms like Turo and Getaround, where you can share your car during the 23 hours a day that you're not using it and earn income for doing so. We have one-way car sharing through platforms like Drive Now and Car2Go. We have intercity ride sharing through platforms like BlaBlaCar. BlaBlaCar transports more than 3 times as many people as the entire Eurostar train network every day, at less than 1% of the cost of capital, because we're using assets we already have. And bike sharing is the fastest growing form of transportation in the world. Now, from a green perspective, shared use transportation is awesome because we are consuming less. We're using fewer resources. When we put one car into shared use, we take somewhere between 9 and 15 cars off the road. This is a huge win all around. Now, as was also mentioned earlier this morning, it's not just about sharing. A common view of where we're heading today is that 3 forces are simultaneously taking place: sharing, autonomous, and electric vehicles. Some people call this the transport trifecta. Now, think about what this means. It means we'll be able to solicit a car for anything at any time. It means we'll be able to regain some of our cities because we won't have nearly the need for parking spaces and parking lots. All cars will be shared in some way. And cities have done estimates. If they put in place fleets of autonomous shared electric vehicles, they need approximately 10% of the number of cars that they currently need today. And of course, think about what this means for your business. You might want to rethink your work process. You might have transport pods or transport cars where the sole function is to work while you're traveling. And of course, it impacts your supply chain and things like that. Now, I want to keep our focus today on the shared use component, but we really need to keep this bigger picture in mind as well. It's not happening tomorrow, but it is happening faster and sooner than most of us would imagine. Now, let's look at real estate. There we go. Space, buildings, cities. Think about how many kinds of space, homes, office space, retail space, commercial space, parking space, green space, and so on, how many kinds of space are underutilized? Let's take a closer look at office space. Go back to resource underutilization. The average office sits empty and unused 60% of the time during workplace hours and costs 11,000 euro a year to maintain. Again, tremendous waste. At the same time, we see more people around the world who have flexible work arrangements. Maybe they work remotely or they're a freelancer and they don't have an office. But just because you don't have your own office doesn't mean that you don't need a place to work from time to time. Enter Liquid Space. Liquid Space is a platform that matches people looking for flexible, temporary work and meeting space with people who have it. And they're tapping into a wide range of inventory, not just desks and empty offices, but they're tapping into hotel conference rooms, media pods, public libraries, all kinds of workspace that are available by the hour, by the day, or for longer periods of time. Now here, Liquid Space is not only at the intersection of the sharing economy, but also the future of work. They are fundamentally rethinking the 21st century office, and they're lowering overheads and carbon footprints in the process. But it's not just about lower overheads and smaller carbon footprints. We can start there, but we definitely don't end there. And from my perspective, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Pause and think about all of the idle assets in your life, in the office and at home. Maybe it's real estate, maybe it's equipment, maybe it's a skill that you have that you don't get to use very often. Think about how much you have and own, and yet how little of it you actually use. Now, as many of you know, return on assets, or ROA, refers to how profitable a company is relative to its assets. In other words, how efficient management is at using its assets to generate earnings. For companies across the board, ROA has been declining for decades. And, as this chart by Deloitte shows, it's getting close to zero. Of course, ROA goes up when you have fewer idle assets because you're using what you have more efficiently. In other words, the sharing economy can help shift this. So now, let's look at a few more examples to drive this point home from a range of perspectives and industries. Let's start with healthcare. Think about how many people around the world can't access or afford appropriate healthcare, and how often expensive medical technology isn't used. Cohelo is a platform that enables the sharing of medical equipment and clinical expertise. They facilitate doctor-patient relations, save both doctors and patients money, and enable healthcare providers to collaborate and open new lines of business. Now, Cohelo is sharing the entire medical space, so to speak. They're not yet sharing hospital space, but you could easily imagine them doing so. And so from this perspective, a sort of sharing economy Cohelo perspective, what might the hospital of the future look like? Or, let's take a look, there we go, at insurance. Okay, in an access over ownership world, what does this mean? Well, for example, we know how to insure your car when you own it. So it's sort of common procedure. But the moment you put your car into shared use, many traditional insurance policies break down. Indeed, insurance and risk management are one of the key, what I call, enablers of the sharing economy. They enable more and more responsible sharing. And not surprisingly, new platforms are emerging to meet these needs. One great example is Trove. Trove provides on-demand insurance for single items over short periods of time. Think micro-duration policies, micro-premiums, and seasonal coverage. Or put this in practical terms, imagine being able to insure your skis just during the winter months, or even better, just while you're on the slopes. Or insuring your expensive camera only while you're on holiday for approximately 11 cents a day. This makes a lot of sense. So, Trove partners with major insurers around the world and becomes the customer face for new products. Trove can piggyback on the insurance company's customer base and resources, and traditional insurance companies can deliver innovative products more quickly. Now here's the hook. Think about this. Platforms like Trove are encouraging not only more sharing, but also a more circular economy, because we're keeping assets in use through sharing, and we're keeping them out of landfill. Now, for just a moment, let's switch gears and shift from talking about business to talking about cities and governments. What's the sharing economy? What does it have to do with cities, government, and the public sector? Now, unfortunately, we can't go into all of the examples I'd like to talk to you about today. I give speeches just on sharing cities, but feel free to ask me about it later. And I'll share a few of my favorite case studies with you now. So, Seoul, South Korea, one of the leaders in this space. They have an entire sharing economy, sharing city team within municipal government. They have invested public funds in over 50 different sharing economy companies and initiatives, and they actively measure their CO2 emissions reductions due to sharing economy activities. Then you've got the Netherlands, where last year they launched what's called the Green Deal, which is a massive collaboration between 4 major municipalities, car-sharing companies, insurance companies, universities, and a range of businesses and interest groups. They have one goal: 100,000 shared cars in the Netherlands by 2018. To put that in perspective, nowhere else in the world comes even close. Now, go back to what I was saying about how many cars will come off the road. You could easily imagine a traffic-free Netherlands in the relatively near future, and of course, think about what this means for their climate goals. Then let's go to Asia. Back to Asia, I should say. China. Get ready for this. The Chinese government has declared recently that they believe that the sharing economy will comprise 10% of China's GDP by 2020, and they're matching this to their sustainability goals as well. Here in the Nordics, Denmark has been a real leader in this space. They have invested more in their national sharing economy review than any other country I've seen thus far. It was supposed to publish last year, and then you had some delays in publication, and then you had a new government, so it hasn't actually published yet, but that is going to happen soon. Nonetheless, Denmark is investing an enormous amount in this space and targeting it, matching their sharing economy strategy to their circular economy strategy as well. Okay, pause and think about what you've just heard. Transportation, real estate, healthcare, insurance, even cities. The sharing economy is showing up almost everywhere, and it offers a range of individual and business benefits. But it's only when we look at what's going on from an ecosystem perspective that we start to really understand the magnitude of what it represents. So, we can start with the environment. Sharing, rather than owning, consumes fewer resources. We use less, full stop. Then, economics. Sharing rather than owning allows you to save money, allows you to earn income in new ways, and it boosts ROA. Access rather than ownership also enhances choice and convenience. But it's not just that. When you put your office space or other asset into shared use, you bring other humans into the picture. You begin to increase the diversity of your ideas and your talent base. You begin to nurture new enterprises. You begin to build community, which is a new kind of asset in itself. Now, I call this approach layers of value. You're not just mitigating a cost or reducing resource consumption. You're actually creating new and unexpected value and benefits for the company and everyone it touches. Now, this is the real innovation and the real winner. So if any of what I've said thus far sounds interesting and you want to learn more, do more, where should you start? Again, unfortunately, I have far more suggestions than we have time for today, but a few of my top picks. First, not surprisingly, learn as much as you can. The sharing economy is in the news every single day. Read the news. The European Union has a whole sharing economy agenda. And of course, invest in learning about where your company sits on this spectrum. Second, consider design for sharing and its business implications. What does it mean to design products and services for sharing? Well, it means they need to be more durable, more social, and more purpose-built. It does mean you may need to produce fewer things, but things that are more easily personalized. Third, nudge the government. To be honest, Norway has a much smaller sharing economy than I would expect to find based on your priorities. Now, you do have a national sharing economy review underway. The tax and fiscal report was published about 2 weeks ago, and Professor Gabrielsen, who will speak right after me, is on the committee for the review. So I'm going to let him tell you more about what's happening here. But the point is the government here has not been nearly as proactive as many other places. Push them to do more. And finally, participate. Get involved. Try out some of these platforms. Talk to your friends and colleagues. I have found invariably that if you find this kind of thing interesting, you are not alone. And it only takes a few people to start a sharing movement. Okay, coming full circle and looking ahead. The sharing economy isn't a panacea, and it's not going to overtake the entire economy overnight. Not at all. But it is an increasingly important piece of the overall economic pie. Opportunities to get involved are all around you, and it takes the circular economy to a whole new level. The implications of the circular economy are much broader and deeper if we take stock of what we heard this morning and what you've heard just now. In the sharing economy, it is profoundly more human. And if we want an economy that works for humans, for people, and for community, and for the planet, then the sharing economy is a necessary and essential part of it, not just to survive, but to thrive. So I'll end with this question for all of you. If this sounds interesting, what can you do today to help make it happen, to help it grow here in Norway, and to help Norway lead the charge? With that, thank you very much for listening, and I think we're going to have a discussion. Thank you.